You've been shooting slingshots of a particular fork width for quite a while now, but you've just seen one with a more narrow fork width that you'd like to try. The question is, does this difference in fork width have any effect on your aiming or accuracy? Let's talk about it. I'm Jeff Jones, and this is my anchor point. What do I mean when I say fork width? I mean the measurement from this corner to this corner right here. That's fork width. I think it's safe to assume that any difference in that dimension between slingshots is going to have an effect on your aim or your accuracy. What is that effect? How big is it? And what can we do to compensate or adapt to it? Early on, I was building and shooting slingshots with a fork width of about 82 to 84 millimeters or 3¼ inches. My ammo of choice was 3/8 inch or 9.5 millimeter steel, and my bands that I was outfitting my slingshots with were 0.75 millimeters or thicker. The heavier bands would give me more of a flat trajectory, but they'd also give me enough power to ethically kill small game with 9.5 millimeter steel. I was getting some drop, but I was hitting the target a good percentage of the time at 10 yards. I was using this corner of the slingshot as my aiming reference, and I'd gotten my anchor point pretty well dialed in by putting this part of my thumb knuckle in my ear hole. What does that look like? About like that. So this is where my anchor point is. I didn't want to change that because I'd spent so much time building my muscle memory for that anchor point. Like everybody in the slingshot community, we all are kind of conscious of what other people are doing. I was seeing a lot of people shooting lighter ammo with lighter bands. So I was shooting 9.5 millimeter steel while some people were shooting 8 millimeter steel. They were also using lighter bands, and I was starting to get intrigued because it looked effortless. So I geared up. I bought some 8 millimeter steel and some lighter bands and started shooting. What happened? My accuracy went to hell in a handbasket. At the time, I wasn't sure why, but without doing much analysis, I decided to try something else. A lot of people were shooting 90 millimeter wide slingshots when I was shooting 82, 84. What could it hurt? So I built some 90 millimeter wide slingshots and started shooting. How'd that work out? Shooting lighter bands, lighter ammo on a 90 millimeter wide slingshot frame was a game changer for me. I was again aiming accurately with the corner of my slingshot, even though it was a 90 millimeter frame. That's been my default frame size ever since. Even in the woods with 9.5 steel and heavier bands, I was still shooting better with a 90 millimeter slingshot than I had been with an 82. Months later, I thought about this arsenal of 82 or 84 millimeter wide slingshots that I have, what to do with them. So I pulled some of them out and started shooting. I was consistently missing the target in the same spot every time with that more narrow frame. What was happening? I even shot a short off-the-cuff video documenting what was happening and my solution. But the deeper I got into the explanation as to how this was happening or why, I realized I was opening up not only a can of worms, but a whole shipping container of them. This video was turning into something a lot more complicated, and I knew I was going to have to either really refine it or break it down into multiple sections or chapters and cover it at different times in different videos. So, Jeff, what happened when you were shooting lighter bands and 8 millimeter steel with the 82 to 84 millimeter wide slingshots? Well, my groupings were close and tight, but they were all above the target. Why? Let's take a look at this. See the difference between the 90 millimeter Kestrel on the right and the 84 millimeter Wildthorn on the left. If you're aiming and shooting accurately off of that upper corner of the Kestrel on the right, look at where that corresponds to where you should aim with the Wildthorn on the left. About a quarter of an inch off of the Slingshot frame, meaning that if you're aiming off of that corner of the Wildthorn, you would be aiming below the target. Let's dive deeper. I'm going to play the original clip of me shooting the Wildthorn. That's going to lead into some serious diagrams that I drew that'll explain this concept. And I'm going to go ahead and play my original outro to the video, and we'll finish up there. It's a chilly day, and I've got no heat in this part of my building, but I wanted to get some shooting in. I'm wearing some gloves, just some light gloves that I've cut the forefinger and the thumb out of so that I can pinch a pouch. But I'm shooting this little plywood version of my Wildthorn model. It's dyed with some nice bright wood dyes and banded with 0.6 Sniper Sling yellow in a 20 to 12 taper. This particular frame is 84 millimeters wide. I shoot a 90 most often, so I'm going to have to aim a little bit different than usual. I'll have to aim below the target in order to shoot these 8 millimeter steel balls. Just like that. I don't want to move my anchor point. I want to use the same anchor point, so that's why I have to adjust by shooting slightly lower. Did any of that make sense? I aimed too low that time. That was just right, but I was aiming probably an inch, between 1 and 2 inches below the target. Let's explain this more concisely with some diagrams. I'm going to draw a series of illustrations that hopefully explain the issues involved with shooting a smaller slingshot frame while still maintaining your own well-established anchor point. If you're like me, you've spent hours and hours locking your anchor point into your instinctive mind and muscle memory. I'm not ready to just move it around my face willy-nilly. There's this cheekbone of our first shooter, and that circle represents the ammunition or anchor point. Here's our target over here on the right, and the corner of his mouth. Our aiming line of sight, we're aiming directly at the target here. Nothing here is drawn to scale, by the way. It just represents this concept. Here's our 90 millimeter wide slingshot, and that point there where it lines up with our sight, our line of sight, is our aiming reference on the corner of our slingshot. That point through the middle is where our ammunition passes from our anchor point through the middle of the slingshot frame to hopefully strike at the target we were aiming at using the corner of our 90 millimeter frame as a reference. So far, so good. This is how our slingshot is supposed to work, and the concept we center all our variables around to develop our skill and accuracy. Our second shooter is going to be shooting an 80 millimeter slingshot frame. So we were shooting a 90, and now we're going to shoot a more narrow frame. There's our anchor point represented by that circle. And now we're going to put in the target over here on the right. Just like shooter number 1, we're going to aim directly at the target. So from shooter number 2's eyeball to the target, we'll draw this straight line. This represents the 80 millimeter frame now, with that line representing the center of the 80 millimeter frame. Using the corner of our 80 millimeter slingshot frame as an aiming reference, we're going to take this shot from our anchor point through the center of our frame, and it's going to pass above the target. This is what I was trying to convey earlier when I was shooting my 84 millimeter frame. It should make sense now that we've diagrammed it out. How do we solve for this issue? One way is to move our anchor point higher on our cheek. Not a horrible solution unless you just don't want to change it, like I don't want to change mine. Shooter number 3 is also shooting an 80 millimeter frame with the same anchor point on his cheek as the other 2 shooters. But this time, he's going to be aiming below the target. Let's see what that looks like. How far below the target he's going to be aiming is going to be determined by several different factors, one of which is the distance from the target he's shooting. If he's shooting from 10 yards, he may need to aim an inch or 2 below the target. If he's shooting from 15 yards, he may have to put his aiming reference back on the target again to compensate for drop. You can see how complicated this can get. It's crazy. Using an 80 millimeter frame and his original anchor point, he's aiming below the target, and his shot hits the target this time. Let's go back and look at illustration number 2 that discusses what I was trying to convey earlier when I was talking about shooting heavier ammunition with a more narrow slingshot. With our 80 millimeter slingshot, heavier ammunition was going to drop just like this, as opposed to a flat trajectory like this. So that's what was happening with my shooting a narrow slingshot, was that my heavy ammo was dropping and striking the target, even though I was aiming directly at the target. My issues arose when I started shooting lighter ammunition with a narrow slingshot. I feel like the more I tried to explain that, the more complicated and confusing my explanation became. To recap, if you're shooting a 90 millimeter frame and you want to shoot a more narrow frame like an 80 or an 84 without changing your anchor point, aim below the target. Of course, this all has to do with practice. You have to practice to find where you need to aim in order to hit that target. It becomes almost like instinctive shooting at that point. But once I figured out what was happening and diagrammed it out, I wasn't as intimidated to shoot slingshots of different sizes anymore, and I could adjust according to the situation. And always remember, nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to play the violin. If you enjoyed this video and learned anything at all, drop me a like and talk to me down in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.